Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. My guest in this episode is Claudia Campbell-Maitland. She has many years of industry experience in vitro diagnostics, both from a technology development point of view and also in marketing, strategy, and project management. We are talking about some unique challenges in risk management of IVDs compared to other medical devices used for therapeutic purposes, and the importance of early strategy development in risk management. We had this conversation as part of our weekly LinkedIn live audio series in front of a live audience. You're about to hear a recording of our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to our Let's Talk Risk conversation. But I want to jump right into our main topic today, which is going to be around IVD risk management or in vitro diagnostics risk management. And my guest today is Claudia Campbell-Maitland, who has many, many years of IVD industry experience, both on the technology side, but also on the project management side. So Claudia, welcome today. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Naveen. I'm really thrilled to be here today.
Great, Claudia. So why don't we start by just having you briefly introduce yourself to our audience today?
So like you said, I've been in the IVD industry and the greater medical device industry. I'm coming up on almost 40 years, so I have a lot of gray hair here as part of that. But my full-time career was in IVDs, ranging from point of care to laboratory systems, starting in R&D, moving into tech support and marketing and business development, and then back into R&D, all along the way managing projects and also, gaining experience and learning quality and regulatory principles along the way. Since 2015, I've been working as a consultant with small companies, helping them to translate their innovations into the medical device design development process. So I work now with a broader range of Class 1 through Class 3 devices, but I have to say my heart still lives with IVDs.
Got you. And this is what I find exciting about your career journey, Claudia, because I think you have focused not only on the technical regulatory side, but also on the strategy side. And this is what I want to start with. It's like, how would you go about developing a strategy for development and launch for an IVD, in contrast to a medical device that is mostly used for therapeutic purposes? And I know risk management is our focus. So from that point of view, let's start talking about IVDs and how would you even consider developing your strategy?
Yeah, so from a risk viewpoint, IVDs have some nuances that are a little bit different than other medical devices. When we look at IVDs, and this is what fascinates me so much about this industry, we have a range of between very simple lateral flow devices that are non-instrumented, like what we all used during the pandemic and what was previously used for glucose, to what we see as more complex systems where you have assays with the device, with software for configuration, software for connectivity, use of external controls and onboard controls. And then if you progress even more, combination systems where you have a companion diagnostic or a complementary device, complementary diagnostic for precision medicine. Also trends, a continuing trend of decentralization from the hospital or the clinical lab into the home or the clinic. We even see that today with glucose systems. The continuous glucose monitors now are going to be going to home, and then new regulatory frameworks, for things like laboratory developed tests, the use of AI and incorporation in IVDs and much more. So when you look at that breadth, I think it can almost be overwhelming, especially if you're on that more complex IVD side. So how do you even begin the risk management effort? And that's where I think a lot of people just kind of look at ISO 14971 and say, okay, I'm just going to follow this to the letter because I just have to get this done. So it kind of becomes a checkbox exercise instead of an exercise of how do we look at this holistically? Because ultimately we're trying to do the right thing for the patient.
Yeah. Yeah. So from that context, can you give an example of how do you get started? I would think that you may have to start with the intended use and who's going to use it, right?
Definitely. So for me, there are like a few pillars that I consider essential to defining your risk management strategy. So for me, what is that system definition? Is it this less complex, more well-known lateral flow system, non-instrumented, or maybe, with a simple instrument and some accessories that go with it? Or are you in this much more complex area where you have controls, connectivity, where you're doing precision medicine and all of that? So that's kind of one pillar. The other pillar is who are your user groups? Is it professional? Is it in the hospital clinical laboratory? Is it decentralized to the clinic? Is it decentralized to home? Lay users versus professional users. And then the other pillar for me is also level of novelty. Are you doing something new that is not currently out there, whether it's technology, whether it's analytes, or other things like that? If you look at those three pillars along with the intended use and indications for use, that to me is setting the foundation of, okay, what is our strategy? How are we going to implement risk management for this product? And how are we going to put some boundaries around it? Because I like, what I say, like putting a box around the scope.
Yeah.
How do we start doing that? So one example I can give of a product I worked on not too long ago, and I still work with them on occasion, and I'm under NDA, so I can't talk about it in great detail, but it is a lateral flow system with a simple meter and software that's being used for a point of care analyte where there is no other point of care assay right now. The analyte is analyzed in laboratory systems as part of a panel, but not at the point of care at this time. So they're looking, their initial business strategy was, we want to release this for both home use and professional use. But in talking about the risk, when we kind of look at the system holistically and said, okay, what are the risks of using this in the clinic where you have professionals that can counsel people on the results versus the home where you don't have that piece and you're relying on the layperson to now take action? The business strategy then became, okay, first commercialization professional only, then we will go with the home use later on, just because of the level of risk. So that's where this can really inform business decisions. So that's why I think it's really important that you understand those things holistically at the beginning. Even as you have to start jumping into the risk management documentation early, but making the time and making the conversations to have that more strategic view of all of these, because that is going to inform, what applies, regulatory and quality, but also the business strategy for the product.
Yeah. Excellent. So guys, those of you who are just joining us, we are talking about IVD risk management, and we started our conversation with Claudia around a strategy. So Claudia, what you just mentioned, actually, I have seen it myself. You mentioned the pandemic, and during the COVID times, we had so many IVD devices coming out. But first they were point of care, and then they came to over-the-counter and for home use. And I went through many of those EUAs, and I saw the progression of the requirements and the kind of evidence that the FDA needed before they would allow utilization at home. For example, a usability study was normally required if you want to go to the home use. So what I'm hearing you say is that as QA/RA professionals and risk management professionals, we have the knowledge and insight to figure out what would be required. And I think we can play a leadership role in informing strategy. That is an opportunity I see for us. Am I reading it correctly there? Definitely.
I think regulatory and quality professionals need to see themselves as strategists at the business level as well. And we tend not to do that.
Let me ask you, why is that? Why do we not play that
role? Because there is just so much going on with compliance. And I think everybody tends to think, well, I have to focus on compliance. And they maybe don't even understand how they can contribute and help the quality culture inform the business decisions.
Well, so this is an untapped opportunity for us. And I'm so glad we are having this conversation, guys. And this is one advantage of joining our forum here week after week. We are talking about not just compliance, but an opportunity to shine and take our careers to the next level. So, Claudia, awesome. I want to jump into a little bit of nitty-gritty details of risk analysis. And particularly around IVDs, I think my sense is that people struggle in assigning severity levels or estimating the probability of harm. Can you speak to that a little bit and share an example of this struggle and maybe some advice on how to handle that?
Yes, definitely. I can relate to that because I struggled with this as well. When I was working full-time, I was working at a company that marketed point-of-care diagnostics, specifically in the coagulation area. So we had to remediate our risk management files. And I was the Kappa owner for that remediation effort. And when we were doing that, it kind of got to the point where everything leads to death because everything was, because of the level of severity with delay in treatment, incorrect results, it was like everything was leading to death. And I said, how can we market a product when everything leads to death? And I really believe this was coming from the fact that we were using just one level of probability. If we were truly looking at the sequence of events and the hazardous situations and splitting them apart into the P1, for the hazards and P2 for the situations and sequences. As if you look at the technical report, the 24971, where it gives an explanation of that, if you look at that there and start to use your event trees to really tease out those situations and sequences, I believe you will get more meaningful information as to estimating the probabilities. Severities are going to be pretty well set based on, the FDA hazard codes or whatever you're using to prepare your levels of severity, your levels of harm. But the P is really where you look at, okay, what are the situations that can lead to this? Is every situation and sequence going to lead to death? Unlikely. So it is more work. But to me, it's using these tools to have more meaningful risk evaluations rather than just going headstrong and saying, we've got to just do this and not looking at what the ramifications are.
Excellent point. Claudia, I'm glad you brought up TR 24971. Those of you who are not familiar with that, guys, please go get it. Annex H in ISO TR 24971 is a goldmine of information for IVDs. Claudia, before I invite folks to participate in this conversation, I had one last question for you. We are hearing a lot about LDTs, which is lab development tests, and how FDA has come out with a final route to regulate them. And I know there's a transition timeline for compliance with FDA requirements. But in your view, what would be the biggest change in their approach to risk management in the context of 14971? What would be the change that you anticipate in a lab environment?
So I have not worked a lot with laboratory developed tests, but I'm aware that laboratories do have to have a quality management system. And my understanding is that where they use risk management, it's going to be more in the evaluation of adverse events. So while they will have a basic risk, evaluation system, it is unlikely to meet the guidances and requirements in ISO 14971. So what they would need to do is understand what are they doing now, build the expertise of what is in ISO 14971, do a gap analysis, and then put in a quality plan or however they are going to approach that to say how are they going to remediate their risk management process and develop the appropriate documentation.
And so reading between the lines, I'm actually hearing that, when this goes into full effect, I know there's a timeline, but if they are going to FDA for a PMA or a 510K type of pre-market review, I think the expectation would be that they will comply with 14971. Is that right? Am I reading it correctly?
That is my understanding as well, because the expectation is there that they're going to comply with the medical device quality management system requirements rather than the CLIA requirements for a laboratory quality management system.
Guys, that's awesome. So I know there's a lot going on there. It's a whole new field and very controversial right now. And guys, we're gonna tackle that in our future conversations once again. But this is a great time for me to start inviting you guys for a conversation. Bijan, you're already requesting to speak, and folks, you don't have to wait your turn. Just raise your hand, and I'll bring you on this virtual stage so you can participate. Jed, Bijan, Jed, you are on. So you have joined us. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
I think Bijan had his hand first.
Well, I'm not able to bring him up to stage yet. So just go ahead and please share what you have in mind.
I have three questions for you, Claudia. One, how do you see, because a lot of the older products, instrumentation, have older risk files. So how do you see FMEA as being part of safety risk management for IVDs? Number two, what are your thoughts on reagents and risk management around those as opposed to instruments? And thirdly, we spoke a little bit about LDTs. For smaller manufacturers who just do assays and don't do the test itself, what do you think the LDT rule means for them? Is it business as usual, or will they have to do something else?
All great questions, Jaya. Thank you. So the first one, legacy instruments or legacy systems and FMEAs. The expectation is going to be that the risk management file documentation, including FMEAs, need to be brought up to date with current expectations per 14971. I know back when I was working on remediating risk management files at my prior employer, and even with working with my clients where I was doing the same activity, remediating their risk management files, that is the expectation from FDA and notified bodies. So if that is going to be an extensive effort, and it likely will be when it's a legacy system, they should put a quality plan in place to govern that effort. But yes, from my experience from being in front of auditors and from remediating files is that the expectation is they need to be brought up to date with current expectations per the current standards. Second question, so with reagents, and so again, risk analysis for reagents, just remind me of the question.
Yeah, so how do you think, what would be the different ways to tackle it as opposed to a mechanical instrument, which is more straightforward, right? And with reagents, it's slightly different. So what has been your experience?
Okay, so with reagents, we look at things like the raw materials. We look at things like the interaction of the materials and expiration dating and performance of the reagent, and how that reagent is going to perform within the system, whatever that system is, and how it is either impregnated. If you're looking at a lateral flow membrane, is it dried in a cartridge? Is it dried in a ELISA plate? Whatever that technology is, and how that reagent is being incorporated into that. So you've got to look at it from the materials and production end into the implementation end. So again, as part of your system level, but also at the more granular level. So there'll be FMEAs looking at that more granular level from the bottom up, and then top down from the system level. Mm-hmm. And then they come in the middle.
And I should add, Claudia, recently I think I came across, probably it was a recall, I think for a at-home test where a reagent was supposed to be supplied sterile, and it wasn't. Or maybe there was some doubt about that. So for all these reagents, there is a lot more scrutiny in terms of new types of risk that may happen. So just an excellent point. And can you remind again your third question about LDTs? Go ahead.
Yeah, my third question was about assay manufacturers, right? So if you're supplying assays to labs who are creating LDTs, would the new rule in any way affect those people?
My understanding is yes, because even though they're not manufacturing the system, they are likely to be a key or critical supplier. So the laboratory now is going to become the LDT manufacturer. They now have to have control of their suppliers. So the company that is making the key reagent, they either will ask for or require risk management documentation for that reagent, or they themselves as the manufacturer will need to supply that risk documentation, hopefully working in concert with that reagent manufacturer. But so yes, there will be impact. It's just a matter of is that small manufacturer going to take that task on, or are they going to ask the laboratory developed test manufacturer to take that task on with their inputs and help?
All right, thank you.
I would say this is a very fluid situation right now with LDTs. Yeah. And as I mentioned, I think we're going to tackle this topic in our future conversations as well. But Jay, thank you for your questions. Rafael, you are next. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Well, good morning, everybody. And good morning to you, Claudia. What you mentioned about taking a holistic strategic view of risk with all the experiences you've had really resonated for me, because that's the view I've taken on the risk management teams I've helped run, especially for remedial stuff, and I've been told to stay in my lane many times. My question for you, though, is what would you say a good cadence would be for review and update of the risk management documentation in order to stay current?
All of these documents should be treated ideally as living documents. I don't think once a year is enough. If you're in design and development, I would advise my team, and I would be working with my team, to look at the documentation on a regular basis, whether that's monthly, every couple months. It really depends on what's happening. When we're in a very fluid design development documentation, like in a startup, like what I work on now, and as we're doing animal studies and other things, I'm looking regularly, it may even be weekly. I'm looking at the draft risk management documentation and saying, okay, are we learning things that I now have to start feeding into this? Because right now, because we're such a small team, like I'm the risk person and kind of doing a lot of it on my own, but in concert with the team. So I'm constantly looking at things. In a bigger team, you may be able to do it maybe once a month or whatever. Once you commercialize the device, I would be looking at it at least every few months, or at least as often as you are getting your post-market data in and seeing, okay, what's coming in? Let's look at it. Whether it's from adverse events, whether it's from internal kappas and trends, whether it's publications, anything like that. So that may be quarterly, it may be every couple months. To me, once a year is not enough, because you're going to be missing opportunities, you're going to be missing things that need to be handled sooner rather than later. And you don't want to have things creep up, trends creep up, and now you're in the middle of a crisis because it was actually there, you weren't monitoring it in the risk management file. And that's one of the problems with risk management files in general, is that you may do a beautiful file for commercialization and then no one touches it. Yes. Nobody updates it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen that. Thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Claudia, for that excellent explanation. So again, to emphasize, pre-market and post-market, your frequency may be different, but you should really think hard about that and align it with your current systems. Bijan, I'm glad I was finally able to get you here. So please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Okay, thank you, Naveen. Good to hear you, Claudia. I enjoyed your presentation. I have one question. How do you go about identifying the hazards of IVD systems?
So there are some guidances in the 14971 and 24971, but you could also look at if you have similar devices, whether from yourself as the manufacturer or competitors that are on the market. You can look at things like the MAUDE database. You can look at publications. There are many sources out there that can contribute to understanding the hazards, in concert with your intended use. So in the case of one of the products that I worked on back when I was working full time, there was a point of care device, an activated clotting time that was used to monitor heparin in open heart surgery. So basically things like what impact would incorrect results whether false positive, false negative have? What would delay in treatment? What impact would that have? So looking at how this device is going to be used and when it is used in the procedure, and starting to understand what are the hazards, also including usability. You're in a busy OR, lots of things happening. How does usability feed in? How does biocompatibility feed in? So just understanding from the start, intended use, but then also what is the environment? And what have you learned from either your similar devices or other similar devices out in the market? If it is a totally novel IVD, you may have to do some more digging to try and figure out, potential hazards. But I would say there is typically information available that you can use to start building that hazard list.
And also, Claudia, in 14971, I believe is Annex C, if I'm not wrong, there's sort of a table which provides some examples. And the best thing people can do is review that table and see what might apply to an IVD. And I think, Bijan, I know slightly where you are coming from, because, we struggle with IVDs since we cannot always directly connect, inaccurate result to a harm. So what's the source of harm, which is a hazard? And I think that's a problem.
Right.
So let's continue moving, guys. What I would say is that look up 14971, guys. There's a table which gives you examples of hazards. Figure out what, and I want to emphasize what Claudia said. Look up existing products, and there's a lot of information in the public space. We do have 3 more people waiting, so I'm going to hurry along. Lionel, you are next. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Hey, Naveen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Naveen. Glad to join your talk, your risk talk. And thank you, Claudia, for your excellent presentation. So my question is around IVDRs. And next year, I believe it becomes effective sometime in May, if I'm not mistaken. But considering the previous LTD and IVD regulation, can you talk about what are the main key points of companies overseas that are going to be complying with the new IVDR? And my second question is in terms of the relationship that you have with typically what happens in big pharma companies. They're not really very knowledgeable or developing IVDs. They are contracting out the development of IVDs to perform in their clinical trials. Can you talk about the project management side of things, how important it is to bring those groups together early in the process?
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for these great questions to everybody. I really appreciate it. So in terms of the IVDR, a similar process to what we're experiencing with the MDR, understanding where you're at with your current documentation, doing a gap analysis against the IVDR, because we know there are significant differences, MDD to MDR and IVDD to IVDR, especially with post-market requirements. So understanding where you are, what's needed, putting in a quality plan, and then starting the remediation effort under that quality plan. Basically, legacy devices have to be revalidated, just oversimplifying it. So it's understanding, what is that level of testing that is required. And the second question, I'm sorry, can you remind me of the second question again?
I think it was about project management aspect.
Project management, yes, combination devices, thank you. So yes, there needs to be somebody that can bridge between the pharma, the drug manufacturer, and the device manufacturer. If you have a project manager on either side that can make that bridge, that have experiences on both sides, or you may have to bring in somebody that can do that, or those 2 project managers or program managers from pharma and from device have to learn to communicate and to bridge their 2 teams, because they do speak different languages. And I know if you don't have somebody that can make those translations, it makes it much more difficult.
I think, Claudia, this is great advice for combo products, but I think Leo was going in terms of if you were outsourcing some of the development and scale-up activities.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I missed that.
No problem.
So again, there has to be like a governing quality management system. If you're outsourcing, like who is that governing quality management system? And then who is going to take that lead role to ensure that, anybody on the drug side, anybody on the IVD side are talking to each other and understanding from a project management and schedule and budget and all those things, that they understand what each side needs. So somebody needs to basically translate all those requirements and manage both pieces of it. Especially if it's outsourcing. So if it's outsourcing, they may provide the project manager, but somebody has to understand both sides of it.
Yeah, great point. Guys, we are running against the clock here. But Chris and Kuldeep, you are still welcome to share your questions as comments. Just I would request you to be brief. Chris, you are first. Please go ahead and unmute your mic.
Thanks, Naveen. Hey, Claudia. Yeah, so just a couple of quick things that came up. 24971 has NXH. I'm sure Claudia has your email about that one, as the guidance in 24971 for IVDs. Bijan had mentioned starting the hazard sort of analysis for an IVD, and I can tell you from actually working with Claudia on my first IVD a few years ago, it was eye-opening. But what was for sure was that usability was a huge factor in doing the hazard analysis, because there are so many things that can go wrong, just like on a medical device. So from that perspective, the approach for IVDs from the usability, hazard analysis, and the URRA, same thing. I'll stop there.
No problem.
And let Kuldeep have a go. Thanks.
That's an excellent point, Chris. Claudia, do you want to add a few points to that from a usability point of view, and whether that can lead to identifying new hazards?
Definitely. So whether you're in the home environment, clinic environment, the other decentralized environments, the hospital or laboratory environment, understanding those user groups sooner rather than later is key. Starting to define what the differences are, actually using like a usability engineering plan as much as you can do, because that's going to lead you to more conversations on risk in those particular clinical environments. And then again, help you to understand, okay, are there pathways we should take, business pathways we should take based on maybe a higher level of risk in this environment versus another one. But really don't leave that until like validation. And then, now we have to do usability, have those conversations, even in feasibility.
Yes.
Because formative usability, that should be done early on so that you can start to use those findings to inform the summative usability validation.
Excellent point. Kuldeep, thank you for your patience. Last but not the least, I appreciate your patience. Please go ahead and share what you have in mind.
Yeah, thanks, Naveen. So thanks, Claudia. So my question is I want to know more about how to transit our qualitative risk management to quantitative risk management, especially for the Regent point of view, and how we should be calculating the occurrence. Okay, is it from the number of tests, or kit means how it should be calculated?
Okay, it was breaking up. Your audio was breaking up a little bit for me. Naveen, can you just repeat?
I think the question is about especially from a reagent point of view, how to move from a qualitative risk analysis to a quantitative risk analysis, especially from the probability point of view. How would you even go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you need to determine quantitative thresholds that are going to be meaningful to the risk analysis effort. I'm trying to think back to when I was doing FMEAs for reagents. And in the case that I was working on, because I was working on legacy products for the most part, we had more quantitative information from post-market data, as well as internal production and other, post-production data. So we were able to start quantifying a bit more and making that transition a little bit more meaningful from qualitative to quantitative risk analyses and FMEAs. It's harder when you're doing a new product where you maybe don't have the benefit of that legacy data. So you have to start more qualitative. And as you start to build more data, then you can make that transition. But then set a strategy, or at least assumptions for, why are you taking this qualitative view? What does that mean? What is that grounded in? And then what are you going to ground the more quantitative analyses in? What is the data supporting that?
Excellent point, guys. Thank you, guys. We have to stop here. We're running against the clock here. So, Claudia, I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to process your thoughts and, find out just 2 or 3 key points that you can share with us. But I have a couple of announcements in the meantime. Guys, we are not going to be meeting in the month of August. Summertime, let's just take some time off, recharge our batteries. We'll come back in September. You will see announcements for September coming up on my LinkedIn feed at that time. And also in September, we are going to have a change in schedule. We're going to be doing once every other Friday, not every Friday, like you're used to seeing this every week. And the reason for that is because I've received a lot of feedback about having a more detailed, in-depth conversation in addition to these casual conversations as well. So we're going to be going on a rhythm where every other week we will do this LinkedIn Live audio session. But in between, we will do our some sort of traditional conventional podcast type of format where I'll have somebody that I will sit down and speak to at length. That won't be live, it'll be recorded. And we will provide that podcast on the Let's Talk Risk website. So this will be a nice mix and match, I think. We will still continue our informal casual conversations like these, but also you will have opportunity to have more in-depth podcasts. So I hope you will continue to stay engaged. If you don't know already, the Let's Talk Risk website where all the content is published and the past recordings. The link is there on this event page. Go ahead and check it out and subscribe if you want to be a part of this. With that, Claudia, I invite you to share some closing comments in terms of points we can take away.
Thank you, Naveen. So for me, one of the key takeaways is start your risk strategy and scope discussions early. Feasibility is not too early. If you wait until later in design development, like validation, you're way too late. You're going to be catching up, and you're actually going to be making your lives much harder. So help the project teams start that conversation. If they're not starting it, introduce it. Ask some of those hard questions and make them talk about these things, because the sooner you do it, the sooner it will start to have some benefit to the project. Mm-hmm. So making sure that time is set aside and you have the needed experts, because this is not static. We all talk about, the doing this is often checkbox because there's so many requirements, but making the time to iterate it, these are all living documents that have to be, continuing to be updated, and share the wealth, share this with your other team members. Try to get them indoctrinated, as hard as it is, and I know, in the risk management vernacular, and actually have them help you lead some of these risk management discussions, because if they start to take some ownership, they will be more active. So I think those are my big takeaways from this, and also just trying to have a more strategic, high-level view of it, not just I have to get 14971 done, documentation done, and having that narrow view.
Awesome point, Claudia. Thank you so much, guys. How are you feeling about this conversation? Give us your reaction using the emoji icons. Would love to hear from you. And if you have any other feedback, questions, or comments, just reach out to me directly through LinkedIn. Send me a note, a comment. This conversation is for all of us, for our community together. So I want to really hear from you, your feedback. I really appreciate your time once again. And everybody who participated today on our discussion, many thanks to you. Claudia, once again, thanks a lot for sharing your insights so generously. Everybody, have a good weekend. I'll see you soon in September.